Q. More Vox, reading Stranger in a Fae Land by John Lessem. So, I'll be honest, I don't really know where to start. Or how to start, for that matter. I've never written anything before, unless you count the angsty poetry of my teenage years that was meant to impress the cute goth girls. Introductions are usually a good place to start, I guess, though most immigrant tales start with talk of the old country. Is it acceptable to do both? Might as well. There ain't exactly any English lit majors around to spit on my scribblings in a world where nobody speaks English anyways. My full name is Galvarino Esteban Chavez. My friends in high school called me Gek, because we were nerds who grew up playing Fallout, a game of fantasy and pretend. And the bullies called me Gal, because that way they could tease me and make jokes about me being a girl. My dad named me after an ancient Mapuche warrior who had his severed hands replaced with blades and went right back to killing conquistadors. I never quite lived up to the name. I got pushed around a lot in life. So my family kinda wandered like gypsies. My dad was always looking for greener pastures, and my mom followed him. I got dragged along. We went from Texas to Mexico to Canada, and then back to Texas. But I guess this particular story really began in Louisiana. These are all places from the old world. Texas and Louisiana were states in a country called America, which was a shortened form of United States of America. Canada and Mexico were other countries on that particular landmass, which we called a continent. The entirety of that continent was called North America. So, when I was finishing my young school in Texas, which they call high school there, which is obviously the opposite of things here, things went very wrong for me. My father got shot in a small restaurant. A taqueria Cancun, they called it. Taqueria Cancun number 7. I didn't take it well. Didn't know how to process death back then. So instead of empathy, I wound up getting more bullying. So one day, I got beaten up very badly by 3 older boys. 2 held me, while the 3rd hit me, repeatedly. Eventually, I got an arm free and started trying my best to fight back. I lost. Young school there isn't like it is here. They treat a fight like it's a severe offense, and often the victim is punished. I know. That sounds like madness because it makes no sense, even there. They wrap themselves in layers of civility, which does more harm than good. For a world without glamours or other illusion magic, everything is about keeping the illusion. So to try and preserve the illusion that they cared, they sent me to something called a guidance counselor. A person meant to look after the well-being of a student. I was angry and still bleeding, so I yelled some stuff. Some of the stuff I said was stuff you couldn't say, which is really funny because in that land they have a governing document which rules the land, and that text states that a person has a right to say anything they want. The people took me and put me into a Gayukenham, but there it was called an asylum, though they felt the need to change the name to something that sounded nicer. This was due to an intellect disease that ravaged my land, which they called political correctness. The disease made people think you could fix the ugly parts of life by giving things more pleasant and increasingly complex names. I know it sounds stupid, but I kinda come from a stupid world. I didn't like it there much. In the Guggenheim, I was forced to sit and talk with healers who weren't healers, doctors of the mind and soul that understood neither. They gave me medicine which did not heal, vile stuff that made it hard to feel and even harder to think, when I was supposed to be fixing my thoughts and feelings. I got lucky in a weird way though, because the Gyukenham was not for use only, and I met another patient there. An older man who was a veteran of foreign wars. He talked to me a lot because he couldn't talk to the false healers. So I in turn talked to him, and he listened to me. His name was Johnny Ramble, though I called him Rambles, because he did like to ramble on when he felt he could talk to you. He taught me a lot, like never trust the governing body of rulers in that land. He taught me how to trick our jailers into thinking that I'd taken their Vashan when in reality I hadn't. In my world, we called Vashan poison. He taught me how to lie to the jailers and tell them the things that they wanted to hear too. On one particular day, one of the brain-broken people named Jawad started screaming about lizard people and accused me of being one of them. There are no lizardkin in the world I come from, so you could tell he was truly crackers. He attacked me, and old Johnny yanked him off and started beating him viciously. When the orderlies carried Johnny away, he yelled at me, "You need to learn how to take care of yourself, Galvito!" He got into a lot of trouble because he fought for me, but he never blamed me for that. I'll never forget how he pulled Jawad off me like Jawad was a featherweight. I asked Johnny why he had beaten Jawad when he didn't need to after he yanked him off of me. He told me, "You always have to hurt the enemy to teach them that you're not to be fucked with. If you don't, they'll just try it again." That lesson stuck with me. People thought he was crazy. To me, he was the first person to make any sense in a long time. Well, I said all the right things and the jailers let me out of the Gyukenham, but I had nowhere to go. My mother had remarried and moved to another country. She had gone back to Canada, where they called the states provinces. I had hated it there growing up, and I had no desire to go back. The kids there were worse to me than the kids in other countries. My mother never offered to move me up there either, so it was never really an option nor consideration. So I lived as an urchin on the streets. I stopped going to the young school altogether. I was always hungry. I learned how to steal a bit, but not much else. I had no pride and begged people for coins. Then one day I was begging for change at a roadway intersection in the city they called Houston. It was a very big roadway called Westheimer, and many people traveled it in auto carriages that we called cars. One of these auto carriages stopped, and it was Rambles driving it. He told me to get in, and I went with him to his home. He had just been released from the Gyukenham by lying just the way he taught me. That night, we got drunk on beer, and for the first time in a long time, I felt safe and happy. He also didn't try to touch me inappropriately the way other men did when they offered me a place to stay. Johnny got money from the governing rulership regularly because of the damage that the wars had done to him. We never had much, but he always kept me fed. He started to teach me stuff too. Taught me to drive a carriage and how to shoot a weapon. Taught me how to fight so I didn't feel helpless. I wasn't as strong as him physically, but I was quick and I learned that I could do some damage before I got knocked down. I also learned that if you're going to get your ass kicked, it feels better mentally to get your ass kicked while fighting back. Never back down. Backing down leads to soul sickness. We became what people called preppers. people who stockpiled and trained for our artificial system of civilization to collapse. We had a larger auto carriage, which was known as a van, that he'd built up in a special way. He put light armored plates on it and paid a very skilled mechanic to modify it so it would burn wood as fuel, besides the regular fuel, which was called gasoline. This was nearly completely unheard of in our world and was thought to be impossible. It had 2 beds inside, as well as medical equipment, a reloading bench that doubled as a work table, hidden smuggling compartments, and a small arsenal. All of this was meant to help us escape our rulers when they inevitably came to take our freedoms from us again. Or so he told me. Unbeknownst to me, Johnny had no intention of escaping. That van was meant for me to get away. They did come for him, eventually. He sent me off in the van, and I fled like a coward, as I used to. Johnny died holding his ground against the local constabulary there. It was in the news the next morning. In the van, I found paperwork as well as the equipment and gear. There were new papers for me, a brand new identity. My name was the same, but the numbers which the government gave us to identify us as individuals were different. Social Security number is what they called it, which was important. I couldn't have legally owned the weapons I had because I had mental health issues, according to the asylum we'd met in. Under the new name, I got free money from the rulership every month in what they called a disability, and I received a large sum as Johnny's beneficiary of something known as life insurance. So currency was no longer a problem for me, but loneliness was. I tried to join the standing army of the kingdom, but was rejected because I failed the psychological test, which is a set of questions designed to see if you are either brain broken, soul sick, or inner wounded. I left the recruiter quickly before my new name and number could become compromised. I decided to take further advantage of the new identity and applied for an FFL, or Federal Firearms License. In essence, a permit that lets me sell weapons with approval of the rulership authority. I didn't do it to become a merchant. I did it to gain access to weapons I wouldn't be permitted otherwise. So I started to wander around. This took me to a lot of the darker and wilder places in the countryside. I definitely spent some time doing drugs and hanging out with criminal types, but I didn't like the feeling I got from it. Then I started taking training courses from veterans, and I felt better about myself. They looked out for me. I'd tell them, "Sorry, I'm all fucked up in my head," and they would respond simply with, "You think I ain't traumatized too?" Trauma is my world's word for world hurt. I would also tell them, "I'm sorry I'm not strong like y'all," and they would respond with, "That's okay. It's literally my fucking job to protect the weak. At least you admit it. Other civvies pretend to be strong while sitting in their own pools of cowardly piss." That's a direct quote from one of them, but many echoed that sentiment. Through the training, I met a man from a foreign land. Several foreign lands, actually. His accent did not match his citizenship, and he had been nearly everywhere. His land had a never-ending war. His people were all warriors of the highest caliber. When he left the army of his nation, he sold his martial arts skills around the world to fund his further travels. I met him in a bar, just having a drink. In that bar, 2 men started to harass a younger, prettier girl, and this man just looked at them, raised an eyebrow, and said, "I think that's enough of that, lads. Maybe you should find yourself somewhere else to drink. His tone of voice, you knew he wasn't bluffing. You knew it would not have been a fair fight. It would have been a massacre. I knew instantly that I'd never met anyone as dangerous before in my entire life. Johnny was tough, but Zev was absolutely lethal. There is a huge difference. He was traveling after a big job, so I offered to drive him around the States. We went all over, and he trained me. Taught me better than any of the courses that I had paid for. Eventually, I dropped him off at the Canadian border because he wanted to go to a place called Vancouver, and I couldn't cross the border with a truck full of guns. Zev weaponized me. It was the first time I felt real confidence rather than the artificial confidence of just being well armed. He taught me that the warrior is more important than the weapon. For that, I'll always be grateful. He wasn't the most polite person, though. When I told him I wasn't strong like he was, he replied, "Weakness is a choice. If you don't want to be a bitch your entire life, you've got to decide to change that." That was the moment I asked him to travel with me and became his personal road trip driver. The first night, when I showed him my arsenal, we had gone into a gun geek frenzy. His focus was always on martial skill, but he definitely appreciated that I had the coolest and newest of kit. I had also massively downsized my arsenal at that point too. Less guns meant more room for extra ammunition. Every veteran I'd been taught by had always told me that when you run out of ammo, you've had it. Zev, though, he always said, "When your mag's all empty, it's time for the bayonet or trenching tool." Dude had a streak of pure savage in him. It feels kind of weird going down memory lane like this. Nostalgia is a hell of a drug in its own right. It was hard for me to put pen to papyrus at first writing this, covering parts of my life in the old world that I'd rather forget. Yet, remembering those who coached me and taught me has now brought me a feeling of well-being. I miss them and honor them. A great sensei is something rare to find on that planet, and I had a few. I wish I could show them this place, and that there are other worlds. I had no idea that I was to become explorer of the unknown back then either. I really don't know what happened to the other old world either. I don't care really much. But I hope they eventually found some peace and happiness. I doubt it though, because it seemed like the whole world was going downhill at a very rapid rate. So I was driving back south after dropping Zev off at the border and stopped in Arizona between Flagstaff and Albuquerque for a training seminar on CQB. It was held on Navajo land so that the governing rulers couldn't interfere. This had something to do with ancient treaties signed between the governing rulership and a tribal people that they had wreaked absolute havoc on. Right of conquest is viewed differently there, but it works the same way, and these events wouldn't shock many people here. The moralizing after the conflict is nearly indescribable. The conquerors offered a small portion of land back to the conquered tribes, and a treaty stated that the tribes could be free of the rulership within these boundaries. This was done to convince the tribes to lay down arms and stop fighting, so that the invaders could feel good about themselves. Then the governing rulership immediately began breaking their promises, minimizing the promised lands, and using hasbaka, which they called politics, to further degrade the tribes. At least over here in the Feywild, a conquering kingdom just honestly says, "We won, we'll do as we please." When one of the kingdom defeats another under right of conquest, which is guaranteed by the Unseelie Accords, they don't pretend to be moral, which is kinda grotesque in its own way. But I digress. I was at this training course, and after the recent tutelage, I outperformed every one of the seasoned and experienced warriors who were there. The Leos, constabulary, and the veteran warriors. I shot better than them on flat range and beat every time it took them to clear a kill house, a mock building to simulate indoor battle. So I drove away with a new feeling, a feeling of superiority. For the first time in my life, I liked it. I went down to National Park after that and visited the Carlsbad Caverns, which will never compare to the mass-sprawling Underdark here, and carried on driving down to Texas, my old home state. I stopped in a place called Plantersville to go to a festival that attempts to mimic life from a forgotten era there, and also tries to mimic what life is like here. They called it a Renaissance Festival, and I loved living in fantasy for a while. I considered traveling on with them for a bit, but I was afraid that living in a fantasy world would harm my grasp of reality, given what I'd been through before, because of the Gyukunim. They had told me repeatedly that I didn't understand reality. This was an attempt to weaken my thoughts so that they could force-feed me untruth. I never wanted to experience that again, so I parted ways with those lovely people and drove towards Louisiana, which is a very swampy, marsh-filled place. They called these areas the Bayou, and I was very fond of it there. Lots of little roads that lead to nowhere places where you can do whatever you like without the rulership or constabulary bothering you. I found one of those little places and was getting wildly drunk on whiskey and beer while listening to old music. At one point, a Voxhaft, we called them gators, but had only 4 legs instead of 6, heard my noise and crawled out of a bayou to inspect me, but I took my rifle and fired a shot in the mud to scare it away. I settled back down to drink more and was listening to a song by one of the old world's greatest bands, one so great people called him the Boss, as a nickname and a title. The song was simply called The River, and it was the story of a working man who married his childhood sweetheart. But it's so very beautifully done. It made me think of the only girl in young school who liked me. I thought that when I had a girlfriend, the other boys might stop teasing me, but they didn't. They said she was plain Jane instead of a prom queen, but to me she was the most beautiful girl I could imagine. She listened to me and never judged me, and I in turn learned to listen without judging. You're a lot better off being with a girl who really wants to be with you rather than being with a girl that everybody wants you to be with. If you pursue only artificial beauty in life, you will only find artificial happiness. If you pursue only artificial happiness in life, then you will discover only artificial beauty. I'd rather see life in its truest form, even when it's ugly. I don't want to live or experience a lie, even if it's a pretty one. There are real truths to discover, but only if you're strong enough to accept the ugly with the magnificent. I awoke the next morning to crows cawing and a pounding hangover. During a period of government-mandated isolation, I'd befriended animals when there were no people to hang with. I'd started feeding crows peanuts, and now they recognized me all over, even most of the US. Definitely everywhere in the South, anyways. I regretted it at moments, like that one, and threw them a handful of peanuts before putting the coffee on.